I would make sure we come to the basement and try to get some swinging in or clawing through some Lycra before he got on the bus. And that's what I did at home. And because the bus ride's kind of noisy and that would get him riled up and it's bumpy. So when he gets there, there's a system we worked out with the school. It's called Jump Club. So when he gets off the bus, he can go right to the office and he jumps on the trampoline for a bit before he goes to class. Or right. I think he went to class first and then went to I can't remember the order. But that was available for him throughout the day, as well as use of earphones, noise-canceling headphones, and he sat on a LAKIKID wiggle cushion as well. And then when he would come home, I would make sure we'd go right to doing something active, like do some kind of obstacle course or maybe even swinging. So that was my son's sensory diet. I was giving him movement throughout the day, and it was proactive, in the sense that same thing as, you think of a regular diet. If you're proactive about the foods